Here's who I see making it to Tekken 8. Let's begin. If you know anything about Anna's character, she is extremely expressive and open about herself in comparison to Nina, who is a ice queen and is closed off. Anna, in this case, has two separate Tekken endings that actually establishes her as a movie star, or at least representing her as such, because that ties into her character traits and personality. So it would make sense that Tekken 8 would pay homage to that in some way, alongside her style of shoe wear be visually represented, alongside the core color scheme being crimson itself, obviously being Anna's elite color of choice. Ultimately, it would make sense that that would be a reference to Anna in some way. Obviously, Anna has more reasons as to why she could easily be in Tekken 8, but for the sake of this category, I'd like to sell myself here. Lee's teaser for Tekken 8 is obviously easier to pin down, as we already know that he's the owner of Violet Systems, so it would make sense that Namco would pay homage to that in some way, just to confirm that he's still active in running his business. You'll still know that he's with Jin, Lars, and Elisa still. So obviously Lee will make a return in some way in the story mode, which is a bonus. Looking at Bob's teaser, the name Bob Burger may not sound like much on paper, but when you look at Bob's entire move list throughout the respective Tekken games that he's been a part of, you'll know that Namco has always liked the fact that they can connect this character to food in some sort. So obviously Bob Burger in this context is embracing and paying homage to the fact that his move list is inspired by food names. And while the detail itself isn't that rich in depth, it's more or less a soft Easter egg to respect Bob's character. So obviously Namco likes him enough to make that reference and obviously put him in this case. So the reason why I have Josie here is that as a Tekken 7 character, she has new ideas that have been introduced to us, but they have been extremely underutilized by Bandai Namco. And obviously she's not the only character. Leroy suffered through this once upon a time, and Claudio to an extent as well. The ideas are there for these characters, but they haven't been built upon whatsoever. They don't have that depth because they're obviously way too new. So if you know anything about Josie's character, you'll know that she is both a fashion model and a professional kickboxer. However, her story for Tekken 7 was tied in trying to build her relationship with Kuma, who at the time was seeking out Tekken Force members in the Philippines. So from Kazuya's trailer and within the New York Manhattan stage, you can see that there's a new trailer that establishes itself as being from international territory, obviously tying into the Philippines, which is in fact a nation. We see that there's a model representing new coatwear of some sort, obviously tying to Josie, who is in fact a fashion model as established from Tekken 7. Another Easter egg is the detail May 17th, because if you know anything about Josie's character, you'll know that Namco has always embraced Filipino history when utilizing Josie's character. So May 17th actually ties to one of Jose Rizal's Tagalog translators, and if you know anything about Josie during Tekken 7's development cycle, you'll know that Jose Rizal himself was utilized when creating this character. So obviously, the fact that they're paying more homage to that tells me that they'll obviously have the intent in using Josie again for Tekken 8. There's a few additional details that I could include, but to save time, you might as well just look at my Twitter, because I go over those intricate details. So moving on to the Bears. The Bears have never missed a Tekken game whatsoever, and obviously Namco loves them. They're always camping Hoki. And as such, looking at the New York Manhattan stage, you can see that there's a panda mascot presented near the hot dog stand in that new stage. However, this is only for the daytime version in which you'll see the panda rendition of the mascot. Looking at the evening and nighttime versions, you'll actually see that the mascot changes to a more Kuma-style mascot. Obviously paying homage to the fact that they still acknowledge, or like the two respective bear characters that we have. So obviously they'll be back in some way, shape, or form. So with that being said, these 6 characters, technically 7, have all been teased throughout this new Manhattan stage, but that's the end of that particular stage for the meantime. So looking at Claudio's character, you can see that in Growanda's video, the Colosseum stage actually features multiple flags that all represent one emblem. That emblem being tied to Azazel, if you know anything about Tekken 6. This makes sense for Claudio's character, as he's obviously an exorcist, and if you know anything about Zafina's bio from Tekken 7, you'll know that she actually has Azazel's hand within herself. This would make sense that these two characters work with each other in some way, shape, or form, as Claudio, being an exorcist, can obviously help out Zafina in this context, since she's aware of his faction. And Claudio already being a significant player throughout the events of Tekken 7 means that you can include him in Tekken 8, as he also has a vendetta against Jin and technically Kazuya to some extent. Which means you can include more narrative ideas to progress his character and more about his exorcist background, since that was unexplored in Tekken 7. Obviously it was underutilized, much like some of the newer characters. So it makes sense to use Claudio again in this regard and give us more context and details to work with. Now, a lot of people are probably scratching their heads. Why do I have Ancient Ogre here? This is like the fish out of water throughout all these teasers. Within the Jun Kazama Yakashima stage, Ancient Ogre's logo is actually presented within that stage. Which would make sense since Tekken 8 is paying a lot of homage to Tekken 2 and Tekken 3, much like how Tekken 7 tried to pay its respects to its older titles. For the sake of the story though, it would make sense that you respect a lot of what Tekken 3 had set up. Ogre himself being the main antagonist would be a nice way to pay homage to his character. Him making a debut would not be so unheard of if you played the Tekken 7 story mode with the flashback formulas and how you can obviously overhaul Ogre's gameplay himself, since every character thus far is having their entire move list be reimagined, which would make sense in that regard to like really utilizing a unique character like Ogre in this case. But ultimately, to tie this back to the core teaser, obviously it's not that rich in depth, but it makes sense for the context of this character and what Tekken 8 and 7 have both set up about their story potential. So obviously Ogre making a return in some way wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. So with that being said, that's this category finished. Let's move on to the consider the story section. Alisa is self-explanatory. You already know that she has a close connection with Lars. Obviously she was also in the post-credit scene from Tekken 7, so obviously she'll make a return. She's too integral to the story. Next up I have Bruce Irving here. Obviously, this character is tied to Kazuya Mishima. And if you know anything about Bruce Irvin's character, you'll know that he is obviously Kazuya Mishima's bodyguard, alongside being G-Corp's army leader in Tekken 6. Now, obviously, he wasn't in Tekken 7, but now, since Kazuya is a lot more active as an antagonist for Tekken 8's story, you can pay so much homage to Bruce's history with Kazuya, alongside developing the story of Bruce having morals that would actually conflict with what Kazuya intends to do to the globe within Tekken 8's narrative. Obviously, Kazuya being a lot more maverick in what he would want to do to the globe versus Bruce Irvin, whose intended goal at the time was to only stop the Mishima Zaibatsu. He has a hard goal and looks out for the little guy in that regard, so obviously Kazuya being a lot more chaotic in what he intends to do would be a nice way to give Bruce a reason to fight Kazuya. What also works here now is that Nina is also a nice queen, and is extremely shallow in how she views human life, just because of her assassin history. So obviously this gives you a lot of story potential here with these three characters that would obviously have to work with each other until Bruce himself could potentially defect from the organization, which could really emphasize the detail of why people like this character to begin with, outside of just his gameplay. So I think in that regard, you can do a lot with Bruce to flesh him out to compensate for how many years of Tekken that he's missed. But yeah, Bruce Irvin, he'll be in. Julia Chang, I have her here to connect her to Lee, Lars, and Alisa if you've played Tekken 6. Julia originally working with Lee to infiltrate the G Corporation to gather information as a mole. Now, while they may not pay too much homage to that idea, the opportunity still stands to like really progress that idea if they ever wanted to like revisit that, right? Just to pay homage to like Julia fans. Obviously, outside of the story perspective, you could easily connect her into the base roster if you wanted to. But for the sake of acknowledging the character relationships that actually tie to characters that are extremely integral to the narrative itself, the main narrative, it would make sense to like put Julia here from my perspective at the very least. But yes, I see Julia coming back in this regard. So I have two thoughts here to establish his relationship with Nina Williams. That was obviously set in Tekken 7. What you could also do now though is that you could flesh out his relationship with Anna Williams since the two are related to each other. I feel like if Anna isn't going to be a part of the G Corporation for Tekken 8, she would obviously need something to do if she was going to return to Tekken 8. In this case, you could maybe flesh out her relationship with Steve and try to include the detail in how she could share a lot more information about her feud with Nina to Steve Fox. But I think that would really emphasize and flesh out the detail of Steve learning more about his family's history. Because obviously Nina Williams is extremely close-minded as a character, right? She also doesn't care about Steve, or so she says to him. So I think through that lens, you can actually subvert that idea with Anna, and that she really does care for Steve Fox. That's just me spitballing ideas at most. Really, there's a lot of rich opportunities there to pay off, but this is why I have Steve here to close out my thoughts here. So Horong is obviously tied to Jin Kazama. Obviously, Horong has never missed a Tekken game either. And given the context of Tekken 7, I think it would be humanly realistic that they try to flesh out more of that idea. It's so weird though, because obviously a lot of Jin's story is going to be tied into like stopping Kazuya. So who knows what they're really doing with Horong this time around. Because he doesn't even have like Devil Jin. Because obviously he doesn't even have Devil Jin to fight as like a substitute rival character. I think in some way, shape, or form they'd try to like pay some kind of homage to these two characters. Because at the very least, you could make the case that Horong doesn't really know much about the Mishima's history whatsoever, and now that Jin is a master of controlling his Devil Gene, maybe he can give Horong more context as to why he would always transform. I don't know, something of the sort. But obviously Horong's gonna make it back. He's never missed a Tekken game. And that's the thing, I said it in my last video too, but with Miguel's character, his interaction with Jin Kazama was not canon whatsoever, because keep in mind, throughout the events of Tekken 7, Jin was stuck in a coma throughout the entirety of the main story mode until the post-credit scene. So obviously Jin would not have had that time to have been wandering around the middle of nowhere to eventually run into Miguel and then eventually fight him until Miguel would spare his life. Obviously that interaction never happened whatsoever if you play through the main events of Tekken 7. So maybe they could pay off that idea now for Tekken 8 since Jin is a lot more active and trying to make amends for what he had caused during Tekken 6's events. Which at the very least I think he could pay some kind of homage to the Miguel-Jin dynamic. Obviously you could pay a soft homage to Miguel's late sister. I don't know, there's some ideas I think could pay off. And obviously Miguel's never missed a Tekken game either, so I mean you can easily expect him to make a return. And Zafina, as I mentioned earlier, has a dynamic that could potentially work with Claudio, as these two both despise the Mishimas and what they stand for. So there's a lot of story potential there, and actually keep in mind that Claudio knows Ling Xiaoyu from the events of Tekken 7. Zafina actually knows Wang Jinrei from the events of Tekken 6. So if you ever wanted to include more to that storyline, you could retcon the fact that Zafina knew of Ling Xiaoyu's existence and could really utilize what she knows about Ling Xiaoyu to enhance more of her dynamic with Claudio if the two were to work together. I think that would be a nice way to really flesh out that relationship, and obviously that would give you more of a tribute to what Tekken's history has been set up to be for the events of Tekken 8 and paying off what Tekken 6 had set up. Obviously, you'll have more character relationships to work with newer characters and older characters working together. But to close out my thoughts here, Zafina will obviously make it back. She is extremely unique and successful from Tekken 7's events in comparison to how she was in older titles. Like, she has a lot of relationships with prominent characters that are obviously going to be in this newer title, so I think it would make sense to bring Zafina back in this case. So with that being said, that's the consider for story section. So for the base roster, obviously Brian has never missed a Tekken game in his life. He'll make it back. Yoshimitsu will make it back. Feng Wei will make it back. Kunamitsu's storyline has been revitalized in Tekken 7, so why would they scrap the character, and also consider the fact that she is extremely successful and popular as DLC. If you've seen the Tekken 7 character panels, she's popular enough, she'll make it back. Raven, you obviously need a Raven stand-in, and Master Raven was definitely a success, I would say, and how she's been utilized throughout, so she'll make it back. Armor King is extremely popular and did well as DLC, so I could see him making a return for the base roster. Same case with Craig Marduk in this case. Leo will make it back. Lucky Chloe is extremely popular and successful, and extremely utilized in a lot of the various Bandai Namco projects alongside Josie, so obviously you can expect Lucky Chloe to make a return. Same case with Lydia. Lydia Sobieska will make a return for Tekken 8, and also consider that she does have that practical story potential that could tie into the tone of what Tekken 8 is trying to set up. So I think it would be a missed opportunity to not bring her back. So for the base roster, that's pretty much it. For the maybe category. The maybe category, I said it in my last video too, but if Bandai Namco doesn't do anything new and respectful with Eddie's character, you might as well just scrap him altogether, because it was so disrespectful in how they utilized him during Tekken 7's events, despite being a cultural phenomenon back in Tekken 3. So the fact that they spat in the face of Eddie fans worldwide in 2 separate Tekken 7 endings should tell you that Namco really needs to, I feel like they do need to give this character something to do. And they really could now too if Tekken 8 is trying to redeem Jin Kazama, so maybe you could have Jin make amends with what he had done to someone like Eddie in this case and losing his master. I don't know, something of the sort would be nice. Because otherwise I would put him in the base roster, but if Namco can't think of anything respectful, then honestly you might as well just scrap him. Unless we get another Lucky Chloe Tekken 8 ending with Eddie. And I'm not trying to see that. Now, people are probably wondering why I have Alex and Mokujin here. So keep in mind that in what I said about Ancient Ogre earlier, and that Tekken history is being explored in Tekken 8, most notably with Tekken 2 and Tekken 3, since a lot of the characters from those respective time periods are being presented as big players. So if you know anything about Alex's character, you'll know that Kazuya was committing a lot of nefarious deeds back in that era when he was running the Mishima Zaibatsu. Obviously, that included animal poaching, which led to including Jun Kazama to the storyline. So, in that regard, you could actually include Alex if you wanted to ever pay respect to how Jun and Kazuya met each other and how they had Jin, because obviously you had to set up the fact that Jun was working with an animal protection agency. But to keep it short, that's why you could potentially see Alex. I can't speak for Roger because of that kangaroo video and how that character may have been cancelled by Harada, but at the very least, I don't want to touch that. If you want to look it up for yourself, YouTube exists. And if you know anything about Tekken 3, you'll know that once Ogre had awoken in Mexico, that's when Mokujin had awoken, and from that point onwards, he got introduced into the world of Tekken at the very least. So if they were to ever pay respects to Ogre's character, I feel like it would be a missed opportunity to not utilize that exact same idea with Mokujin. And also keep in mind that with Tekken 8 overhauling every character's moveset now, both Mokujin and Ogre will be the most unique that they've ever been throughout their respective Tekken histories. From a gameplay perspective, of course, right? But really consider the gameplay potential with this character now because of what Tekken 8 is trying to do mechanically. And obviously I would put him in the base roster in this case, but I can see him make a return. Similar case with Eliza and how she was obviously represented as a 2D character in Tekken 7, and 2Ds are extremely controversial because of how powerful they are and fundamentally busted. So obviously, in that regard, you can make the case that a lot of people would be happy if she was scrapped, but I think it's one of those things where she is extremely popular as a character. I can't speak for how she's been utilized by Bandai Namco personally, but the Eliza fans do exist. Whether that be through cosplays, fan arts, or the actual game itself, or content creators. But I think you could make the case that Allies would come back, and obviously with Heat System and all the newer additions, I think Namco could make something work. So at the very least, I can see her making it to the base roster. And worst comes to shove, she could be DLC again. Sergei Dragunov. Why do I have Dragunov in the maybe section? I personally would have put Dragunov in the base roster. Ukraine and Russia's debacle. And it's one of those things where, from a word of mouth and mainstream audience viewpoints, obviously it doesn't really matter to us as players, but to Namco as a company, they do have to be considerate in what characters they pick and how that makes them look at times. And honestly, it's like one of those things where it's like, as a business, you have to. I mean, this isn't to say that they'll scrap Dragunov or anything. It really won't, because at most I put him as DLC. Could easily put him in the base roster still if Namco really didn't care. But this is just to play it safe, because I do not know where I would want to put Dragunov at this very moment. Probably in the base roster. But like, this is just for insurance, because you'll never know. So for the Tekken 7 DLC cast, all these characters have undercooked storylines. The Tekken 7 characters have undercooked storylines, but I feel that Katarina would do well as DLC enough because people actually like her gameplay. She's been extremely underutilized in a lot of external projects from Namco throughout Tekken 7's lifespan in comparison to like Josie and Chloe. But I would say that Katarina at the very least has left that impact and that people value her for her gameplay. Same case for Shaheen. I feel like these two getting reworked mechanically would do so much for their reputations. And that would definitely attract a newer audience as well. Because keep in mind that the story potential isn't that rich in depth, and technically these two do both have a connection of some sort in tying towards the G Corporation, but it's like one of those things where it's like for Katarina, dude, the story potential and just in general, like how do you market this character, right? Because they have not been utilized that well throughout Tekken 7's lifespan, so I don't know if I really feel comfortable with putting her in the base roster. At the very least, I will say that Katarina's voice actress is extremely vocal in supporting both Katarina and engaging with the Tekken community, so I think that's a valuable trait in and of itself to at least put her in as DLC. Obviously, if she gets put into the base roster, I mean, that's welcome too, but I just feel like it's unlikely. Because, like, what are you going to do with Biggest Hour? Like, how do you progress that plot point forward? She obviously doesn't have that many she doesn't have any other character dynamics to work with. Same case with Shaheen. His story is extremely messy. Same case with Falkman. This character is, like, the least marketable out of, like, between him, Lydia, and Leroy, Falkman is the most ineligible to return. Because he has the gameplay component down to a T. But it's one of those things where you have to utilize him in different ways as well if you're Bandai Namco, right? Redesigning the character, giving him new rivalries and relationships, but he doesn't have any, like, at all to begin with. He's like the only new gen character, at least. Lydia has the Zaibatsu. Leroy also has the Zaibatsu now with Kazuya, according to his Tekken story bio. And Lydia naturally falls in line with what Tekken wants to do from a narrative lens anyway, since she's a politician for Poland. So that's a natural way to include her to the Kazuya conflicts. You can't really do the exact same thing with Falkenram here. And see, I've openly pitched the idea that they at least try to include a new original Tekken character that could help progress Falkenram's storyline forward, or at the very least give him either a rival or a supporting friend of some sort. That's also a capable fighter, but could at least help progress his storyline forward and at least trying to like help him out with his family, right? Since that's like the driving force of Falkenram's story, it's his family. So I think utilizing a new original character would do so much in giving them some kind of depth and a first impression of some sort from the audience's perspective, while also paying off what Namco values about Falkenram's character. So you'd be better off paying that off as DLC because people mainly care about Falkenram's gameplay anyways, and I'd argue that both Bruce and Josie have more significant and versatile ways in how they can be utilized within Tekken 8's core lifespan before even reaching like the DLC, before hitting that time period in which we start seeing a lot of like DLC characters. The thing with Lei Wulong here is that he is a detective and does have a lot of story potential, and how you could maybe like reestablish his dynamic with Steve if they ever wanted to. Maybe you could actually tie that to his dynamic with Steve and potentially Anna Williams. If you ever wanted to do more with that family, with this particular family's history. But I guess it's one of those things for me where it's like I need to figure out what Namco wants to do with this character, because obviously in Tekken 7 he was extremely underutilized in just being a fan of Lucky Clothes. I really didn't do much for him whatsoever, and from a gameplay lens, I can't speak as to whether or not he did too well because I had to relook at the stats. But I can't imagine that they were that high, right? Since Lei is apparently, like, you know, on paper he's like that niche character. Right, a lot of people, like, he has his fan base, but overall in comparison to like most of the other characters, he is underplayed in comparison. I think at the very least though, like, people do like the character enough to buy him if he was to ever be represented as DLC within the early portion of Tekken 8's DLC cast. But yeah, but this is what I mean, right? If you can't do anything new with the character, then it's like you might as well not bring him back. So, for the guest characters do not come back in fighting games normally. So, and even though Akuma's canon to the story, he's obviously not coming back, because the core selling point for Tekken 8 is Jin Kazama and Kazuya fighting. So obviously, including Akuma now, kind of does, that's a wrench, that throws a wrench into the story's gears, so it's like you might as well not do it for the sake of, paying off Tekken's like storyline, right? Since that's obviously like the core selling point for Tekken 8. And if they ever did want to include like another faction to conflict with Jin and Kazuya, you could always just include Claudio, since he is an exorcist anyways. And if you've been watching this video thus far, you know what kind of ideas I have in motion when trying to enhance that Claudio plot point, which I think would do a lot for the game. Otherwise, guest characters aren't coming back. Heihachi's obviously not coming back. At the very least, yes, you could have him as flashbacks, but it spits in the face of what Tekken 7 tried to do with this character. You know, him missing a Tekken game, it's fine. You know, it's like Kazuya in Tekken 3. Kazuya being in Tekken 3 would be so uncalled for, despite the game trying to progress its storyline forward with new original characters. So I think it would be welcome that Heihachi misses a game. Double Jin at the very least could also miss this game. Yes, these two characters can have their story mode flashbacks if you really do want to play them. And I feel like Devil Jin would have more significance anyways, as you could use Devil Jin as a precursor to showcase how inexperienced Jin was with the Devil Jin versus how Jin is currently a master in utilizing that power for himself. And I feel like that would be a beautiful way to like really progress Jin's storyline forward, since we didn't really see anything in Tekken 7 anyways, so showcasing that contrast would be a welcome detail to his character. Oh, Ganryu. Dude, this character is so nasty. I mean, that's the thing. People like this character for his gameplay, but if he was to return, Namco has to sell people into, like, caring about this character. Because his only storyline is stalking what is basically your niece. Like, Julia is old enough to be Ganryu's niece, you know? And then once upon a time, it wasn't even Julia that Ganryu was interested in. He was interested in Michelle, but then she grew too old, and then by the Japanese culture and video games made its way into Tekken, you know, she got recasted and replaced with Julia, who was obviously younger and a lot more spry. But then once you bring back Ganryu, and then you rehash that Michelle plot point onto Julia, and then that's basically been the bread and butter and how you utilize the character thus far, then yeah, that becomes kind of unappealing, especially to the point where Julia becomes a internet sensation, and then you basically piggyback on that idea with Ganryu, because you can't think of anything else new to do with that character. So if you're going to tell me you're just going to do the exact same thing for Tekken 8, it's like, well, you better hope Julia's doing something significant, because if she's going to be doing her own thing, like in Tekken 7, then basically, yeah, no, scrap this character in that case. You can't market him otherwise. You cannot tell me that you can do anything new with Ganryu. And in the same case with Gigas, and this is why the first impression lens for stories are so important. This is supposed to be a tragic character that we should be empathizing with. This is Katarina's adoptive father, And instead of feeling sorry for this character, we're out here laughing at his butt on Twitter.
She kinda bad though.
This character is a butt joke. This is why stories and fighting games are so important, because otherwise you get stuff like this. These two characters are not coming back. You can scrap these characters and I can guarantee you that no one will bat an eye outside of people crying about their gameplay. And case in point with Gigas, he was supposed to be the substitute for Marduk, and then lo and behold, look who came back to Tekken 7 anyways. Yeah, Marduk. Funny how that works. And then obviously Kazumi was utilized as an exposition dump for Tekken 7's story, so obviously her role is over. You cannot do anything new with this character, clearly. At the very least, right? Because like she serves no purpose for this family, for the Kazuya and Jin family dynamic, because that's the whole point of Jun Kazama. So obviously, Kazumi is not coming back unless they wanted to do more with the Hachijo clan. Ideas, maybe. And anyways, with that being said, that is the end of this new tier list. If you want to pull up my older prediction tier list for comparison, the video is both within the stamp above, alongside being within the description below. And actually, let me count this. How many characters do we have? So with that being said, this is my new prediction tier list. Share down below if you agree with the characters that I have presented here. Do you agree with these categories? Do you feel as though that this is a coherent criteria in utilizing how to place these Tekken characters? Who would you include? Who would you scrap personally? And be sure to share this video as it does help out a lot. Be sure to sub. Be sure to like the video at the very least if you liked what you've seen. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time.